was Norfolk Southern open, honest, and transparent with your investigation?
They were open, they were honest, and they were transparent based on our requests for information. Was it timely? No.
Norfolk Southern's rail yard workers were expected to inspect each rail car in 1 minute so that the trains could leave on schedule.
The FRA's study that just came out last week showed they're not even giving them a minute, but 44 seconds. So 22 seconds aside.
The cause of this derailment was a failed bearing. It was a 9,300-foot train. It came to 5 presidential appointees, including me, asking us to overrule our investigator in charge and direct him to include evidence that was actually not evidence from this derailment. Norfolk Southern had begun to bring equipment in, planning a vent and burn before incident command or the governor had even signed off.
I know that the incident commander makes the decision. Do we believe that individual made that decision or was expected to make that decision?
The individual did make the decision. However, at the time, there was a false sense of urgency that Norfolk Southern and its contractors created.
In response to East Palestine, the Association of American Railroads, which represents the Class 1 railroads, announced 7 steps to reach 0 incidents and 0 injuries. You can find it on their website. I have the document that's right here. The first step, AAR listed, was detector spacing. AAR stated the industry would deploy 1,000 new hotbox detectors and set a goal of achieving a 15-mile average between detectors. Ms. Homendy, would this average spacing have made a difference in East Palestine?
It would not have.
All right. The fourth safety measure AAR announced was that all Class 1s are joining the FRA's voluntary confidential close call reporting system. This is it. This is the letter. They sent the letter dated March 2nd, 2023 to Secretary Buttigieg. Mr. Bose, how many Class 1s are enrolled in the program and how many employees of those railroads are covered by the program?
Mr. Chairman, 2 railroads have pilot programs, approximately 1,500 craft workers from conductors, engineers, and dispatchers.
The letter is well over a year old, March of 2023, and you got 2 of the 6. Chairwoman Homendy, I would like to thank you and your team on the hard work and thorough final report. You did a great job. There have been some allegations about Norfolk Southern's conduct that I would like to have addressed. I want to address it for the record. In your opinion, was Norfolk Southern open, honest, and transparent with your investigation?
They were open, they were honest, and they were transparent based on our requests for information. Was it timely? No. Were other actions taken that were in violation of our party regulations and our party rules? Yes.
There's a Wall Street Journal article that actually says that Norfolk Southern's rail yard workers were expected to inspect each rail car in 1 minute so that the trains could leave on schedule. Do you think 1 minute is sufficient to perform all the needed safety checks on one rail car? I think you kind of answered that.
Yeah, well, that's the funny thing is that policy was in place, but it's not even 1 minute. I remember Norfolk Southern's response was like, well, that's a bit of a guideline. Well, the FRA's study that just came out last week showed they're not even giving them a minute, but 44 seconds. So 22 seconds aside. And this is a year and a half after East Palestine, where a lot of media has covered this issue because our carmen are sick and tired of it. They're rushed. They can't do the job well.
Can you share a few specific recommendations on what you believe that Congress can do to ensure that this tragedy never happens again? Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. One particular example would be an aggressive phase-out of DOT 111 tank cars. This started with a DOT 111 tank car in flammable service, but then also expanding that to include other hazardous materials and phasing out those DOT 111s. That would be a tremendous improvement in rail safety overall.
Now, this little ring on my finger measures my body temperature all day long. It costs a couple $100, in addition to taking much more complex measurements of my heart rate, variability, et cetera. If every wheel on a freight train had a temperature sensor like that transmitted directly to the locomotive engineer to detect any unexplained rise in temperature, would that make trains safer?
Yes, it would make trains
Mr.
safer.
Bose, would this technology providing constant real-time measurements directly to operating crews be more effective than simply having more wayside detectors?
Yes, sir.
Mr. Sloan, would your customers benefit from having real-time location and car health data on their shipments and on the cars hauling them across the country?
I mean, we believe that onboard sensors have the potential to provide additional safety benefits, but I think there's a lot of work still to develop them.
There was the vast number of agencies that were part of the response. My figures is 48 different agencies were involved one way or the other at the time of or follow-up on that. How do you see we can have a better job of coordinating, maybe don't have so many to deal with in a short amount of time to make a key decision? I'm still bothered by the decision to burn the material in the rail car.
Are you referring to the vent and burn, or are you referring to the emergency response immediately after the derailment?
Immediately after.
So immediately after the derailment, emergency responders need information. They need to know what's in those train cars to protect themselves, and they need to know what's in there to protect communities. And that's by getting the train consist from the railroads. By law, it's their requirement to provide that information to emergency responders. It is not unknown to a railroad what their network is, where their trains operate. They know when a derailment occurs. We have email. Send a train consist to an incident commander. In this case, it would have been the East Palestine Fire Department. They were incident command. But the incident commanders did not have access to that train consist for hours. Meanwhile, they were getting exposed to a significant hazardous materials release. I'll also mention radio interoperability was a big issue. These agencies could not talk to each other.
Chair Homendy, although the wheel bearing that failed on the East Palestine train was indicated in an alert, it was low priority alert and did not reflect the true condition of the bearing. In addition to this, NTSB indicated that railroads' operational responses to bearing alerts is an issue in itself. Is there a way to improve the accuracy of these alerts? And in your opinion, are rail workers empowered to respond to alerts in a way that minimizes risk?
Well, in this case, there was only one person working that desk. At the time, Norfolk Southern had additional personnel. They went down to one. Now they've added more personnel. So having more personnel certainly could help. With respect to our findings and our recommendations, our biggest recommendation is to the Federal Railroad Administration to do research on bearings, including railroad responses to alerts and thresholds and spacing, and then to develop regulations around that.
What's the likelihood of a similar East Palestine type accident, chemical car derailment, fire happening in my district, in the Lions, in my community?
Congressman, it's hard to answer that exactly. I will say this. Unfortunately, we've learned a lot from East Palestine. I think the railroad industry has learned a lot not to repeat, again, the things that did or did not happen there.
Anyone else? I would appreciate just any other context. And that's, by the way, very helpful, Mr. Bose.
I appreciate that, except the NTSB has investigated numerous rail accidents over decades where we've issued recommendations that we've repeated and repeated and repeated with zero action by the railroads, by some regulators, And so, yes, I can't quantify a likelihood for a number, but could it occur in your district? It could occur in any of your districts. And we will be there. But again, we'll probably have additional recommendations that we have issued previously.
I would like all the people on the panel who work for the Class 1 railroads to stand up, please. Let the record reflect that no one stood up because they didn't bother to show up, even though they're invited to this hearing. BNSF, Union Pacific, and Canadian National were all invited to this hearing, and they are not here, and that is shameful. That is not okay. I represent a little town called DeSoto, Wisconsin. We had record flooding last April. I called the BNSF Railroad on the 21st of April. I said, I'm distinctly uncomfortable with the conditions of the tracks due to the scouring that's taking place, due to the flooding of the Mississippi River, and the BNSF Railroad essentially patted me on the head on the phone and said, don't worry, Mr. Congressman, we've been doing this for 100 years, we know what the hell we're doing. And 6 days later, on the 27th, there were several rail cars full of paint and batteries floating down the Mississippi River that almost hit a lock and dam, which would have caused potentially a catastrophic cascading effect that could wipe out hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars worth of wetland restoration. Needless to say, we don't have the best relationship at this point. Do you have any type of recourse when they blow you off?
We do not. FRA has enforcement authority, however.
And what does that mean, sir?
Congressman, that means that when we find violations or non-compliance with our regulations, we issue fines, and we settle those fines. They have an ability to object, and we reach a settlement.
Would you, sir, do me a favor when this is over? Will you get me a list of those fines that you've levied?
Yes, sir. When we complete the process, we absolutely will.
Thank you. I would love to see that.
The settlement, the fines, though, that you issue are settled. They can be settled for pennies on the dollar.
Right. So that's kind of what I'm getting at. I want to see the actual numbers that you submitted and what they actually paid, because we're not doing this anymore. The railroads need to be put in check. And that's what we're here to do. And I want to thank Chairman Nels for his leadership on this bill. I'm very happy to be an original co-sponsor and also the original for HR 4085, the Rail Inspector Safety Act, which came from a direct recommendation from you, ma'am. So keep up the good work. I appreciate it. I yield back.
But if I could say one thing to Congressman.
It will be up to the chairman, sir. My time has expired.
Go ahead, sir. Answer his question if you want.
No, I just wanted to say thank you for bringing up the issue repeatedly now on the need for more FRA inspectors out in the field. We need more cops on the beat, and we need them to be more efficient. One of the things I mentioned in my testimony is the laborious nature of writing a violation for one single violation. If you look through the FRA's MP&E study, you'll see, for whatever was 1,400 defects found, 47 violations. Every single one of those defects is technically a violation. It just takes the inspector out of the field and into an office to write a mountain of paperwork and takes them away from where they're needed, out in the field. Why don't we have something that's like, for a police officer, writing a ticket, writing a parking ticket, writing a speeding ticket, to make the entire thing much more efficient?
What types of regulations or safeguards should there be put in place to ensure that the railroads are maximizing the effectiveness of this technology and thereby increasing rail safety outcomes? Just a follow-up on what you just gave to us.
Oh, thank you. So two things. One of the things that, and with all defect detectors, we don't believe you should be allowed to turn them off when they're inconvenient, first and foremost. Secondly, with regards to these fancy camera portals, we think that the imaging is best placed in the hands of the people that know what to do with it. So the qualified mechanical inspector, which is the regulatory term for a carman. These guys spend their entire lives looking at defects on rail cars. If they were able to have this brand new, amazing AI-driven technology placed directly in their hands, they'd be much more effective, efficient, and they'd make the entire network safer.
A couple of things that were not in the report is limiting train lengths and two-man crews, two-person crews. They were not included. Why?
The cause of this derailment was a failed bearing. It was a 9,300-foot train. and it wasn't a factor in the derailment.
Yeah, just we're not directly involved in the tragedy.
Correct.
Yeah, gotcha. So Administrator Bose, turning to you, as the chair just mentioned, overheated bearings that created an axle separation. Have we seen railroads install wayside detectors since this tragedy?
They have been installing wayside detectors.
Do we have a sense of what kind of pace that installation moves at?
In Norfolk Southern's case, it sped up, and they've deployed more of them. In other railroads' cases, it's railroad by railroad, but the technology with detectors and the space between detectors, the distance between detectors, is something that the railroad companies are paying attention to. And Congressman, one more part of that, it's not just deploying, it's the training around that, the maintenance, the operation, and then when the information comes in, to have it properly resourced at the desk level, and then disseminating that information in a timely manner. And the thresholds are important on what set off alerts.
How can we ensure that state and local emergency response officials are informed and prepared to handle hazardous materials traveling through their states, even if that train is classified as a general merchandise train?
They need to be prepared. They need information on what's going through their communities, which we have recommendations on, and PHMSA has done some work on recently. They need gear, they need radio interoperability, and they need training.
Chair Homendy, you tweeted early on in your investigation that withdrawing this rule had no bearing on the East Palestine derailment. Did anything in your investigation change that assessment?
What I stated was ECP brakes had no bearing on this investigation, what happened in East Palestine.
Thank you. In fact, you went so far as to label Secretary Buttigieg's assertion on the withdrawal of the ECP rule as, quote, misinformation. Yet even after this admonition, Secretary Buttigieg continued to insist that this was a policy change needed to prevent another derailment like what we saw in East Palestine. Chair Homendy, does it make your job easier or harder when someone in a position of authority, like the Transportation Secretary, presses forward in making an initial snap, maybe political, misleading policy perception, even after being fact-checked as you did publicly?
Well, actually, at the time, I was agreeing with him because he was talking about improving rail safety, and he was talking about ECP brakes because people brought up that that the DOT should implement the rule on ECP brakes, and they didn't have the regulatory authority, and I was agreeing with him on that.
So in your public tweet on February 16th of 2023, you say that some are saying the ECP braking rule, if implemented, would have prevented this derailment. This is false, and here's why. You then went on to say, that leads me to my last point, anyone speculating about what happened, didn't happen, or should have happened is misleading a suffering community. Please stop misinformation. So are you...
I wasn't referring to the secretary.
Okay, very good.
Could you please detail some of the unusual behavior that was exhibited by Norfolk Southern during your investigation? And have you ever witnessed anything like this before on your investigations?
We have not. This was unprecedented. Norfolk Southern, while open and transparent in providing us information we requested when we requested it, many times delayed providing our investigators who are here today timely access to that information. I had to call them about issuing subpoenas if we didn't get timely information. They manufactured evidence that had nothing to do with this derailment and tried to include it in the record of our investigation. When our investigator in charge told them no 3 times, he's here today, they went around our investigator in charge and tried to get our general counsel to approve that, who also denied them. Then they came to 5 presidential appointees, including me, asking us to overrule our investigator in charge and direct him to include evidence that was actually not evidence from this derailment in our investigation. And I could continue on, but it was unprecedented. Alan Shaw apologized and has committed to not do that again, not have Norfolk Southern do that again, because we had 11 open investigations involving Norfolk Southern. 4 of those are still open, including a safety culture investigation. So we still have to work with them, but his commitment is will be taken seriously. And if I sense that we go back to what occurred in East Palestine, I'm going to hold them accountable.
Could you speak to the timeline for communication for deciding when the controlled burn should have occurred, as briefly as you could?
That was a decision not by NTSB.
Of course. No, but in your report.
Conversations, from our investigation, conversations related to the vent and burn from Norfolk Southern, its contractors, and Oxyvinyls, the shipper, began around the 4th, February 4th, February 5th. Oxyvinyls was on scene on the 5th, and already on the 5th, Norfolk Southern had begun to bring equipment in, planning a vent and burn before Incident Command or the governor had even signed off.
So Norfolk Southern makes the determination that that's the likely outcome. When and who finally made the decision to move forward with the controlled burn?
The information was provided to the incident commander, and the incident commander is a fire chief of East Palestine. But you make your decisions based on complete information, and unfortunately, Norfolk Southern withheld critical information from both him and the governor that could have led to a safer decision.
Having spent 30 years involved with local emergency response as a member of my volunteer fire department, and the last 12 years in emergency management, I know that the incident commander makes the decision, but it is clear to us that that individual was forced into making a decision absent some information. But do we believe that that individual, I understand that's officially the responsibility, do we believe that individual made that decision or was expected to make that decision?
The individual did make the decision. However, at the time, there was a false sense of urgency that Norfolk Southern and its contractors created. You can see it throughout the documentation. You can see it in news releases that were issued that were just not factually correct based on temperatures that were already falling and stabilizing on those tank cars. Unfortunately, they were misled in their decision-making. And in the end, Norfolk Southern gave the incident commander and the governor 13 minutes to make that final decision. And the incident commander had asked to go through the information over and over again and finally had to make the decision, but it was based on inaccurate, incomplete information.
What measures do you think could be implemented to ensure consistent safety practices?
Well, you could pass this law that would make it illegal to prohibit or to enforce any kind of time constraint upon the carman. As I've said before, you can't put a time constraint on safety. But I will also note, in the FRA study, there were remarks from specific FRA inspectors in there where they talked about, how this FRA inspector walked behind a carman doing his job. They found a whole bunch of defects, 10, 17, whatever, combined between the two of them in one train. And then he looks at the FRA inspector, pulls up the records of that railroad. In the previous 24 hours, they'd only found 3 the whole day. It's just not realistic. It's not the truth. So something's going on. And I really, this kind of type of legislation has been a long time coming.
Congressman, if I could just step in as the FRA administrator, when Mr. Arouca is talking about what the railroad, from his information, did, that's absolutely unacceptable. Anytime FRA sees that a railroad is gaming the system, is gaming the inspection process that we have, the oversight that we have, we're going to take action on that. There was a railroad that found out about our safety culture assessment and the questions that we were going to ask in that assessment. As soon as we found out, we withdrew that safety culture assessment of that railroad and made it clear that's unacceptable.
I want to thank each and every one of you for being here. I thought this was a very productive meeting, and this subcommittee stands adjourned.